So this is my first video tutorial for drawing an eye. So let me start off with some basics about the anatomy. The eyeball is a basic shape. It's a sphere. So it's a ball essentially sitting inside the inside of another ball. So keep in mind all the time that you're trying to draw a sphere. Another rule is that the iris, which is the color part of the eye, and the pupil are always circles. Unless you have a birth defect or your eye's been damaged by an injury, these two things are always a circle, and they're always the pupil's always centered perfectly in the middle of the iris. So I start off first just by drawing these two circles. Ignore everything else about the eye, just get your iris and your pupil proportionately right and centered. So if I want this eye to fit in this area of my paper, I don't want that pupil or an iris too big because I don't want the corners of the eye to go off of the paper, but I don't want it too small because I don't want my drawing to be only this big when I'm done. So I want the eye maybe just slightly bigger than my little example here. So I want my iris probably about that big. So I'm going to start off with a little stencil. You guys get to cheat. I'm going to draw a circle real lightly. Then there's these little marks on the outside that give you like a visual bullseye, and I'm going to put a dot in the middle. Then I'm going to get the smaller circle stencil and put a pupil in that looks proportionately correct for the pupil in my reference image. So now I've got my two circles. Now you have to decide how the eyelid falls over the surface of that sphere. How does your eyelid hold that sphere, your eyeball, into your skull? First thing I do is figure out proportionately, how big the iris is in comparison to how far the distance from the corner of the eye is to the iris. So I get this area the right size. So I measure it first with my pencil, get a good idea about how wide that iris is. Then I compare this length to the length from the edge of the iris to the corner of the eye. So compare this to this. And it is about 3/4 the distance. So from here to here, if that's a hole, from here to here on this example is only about 3/4 as big as from here to here. So I'm going to measure my iris, and I'm going to move my finger over so it's about 3/4 of the length. I'm going to line up my finger at the edge of the iris, and I'm going to put a dot right there. Now the problem is that corner of the eye is probably now not in the right position vertically. So if you go over and look at your eye, that corner of the eye, kind of eyeball, bring across, eyeball, get it? Come across and figure out where it hits in the colored part of the eye. So it hits just above the bottom edge of the color. So I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna move that dot down that low. That's the corner of the eye. So I'm gonna get rid of this dot. That's where that corner is gonna be. Now do it for the other side of the eye. Measure your iris and compare that length to the length from the edge of the iris to the corner of the eye. And it's just under half. So I measure my iris. I'm gonna move my finger to half and then just go a little bit smaller. Put that pencil at the edge of the iris, and I'm gonna put a dot right there. Then, same thing, I'm gonna go, if I were to draw a line from here across the eye, it's in the bottom part of the pupil. So from here out, I'm gonna move that dot down just a little bit. So that is the inner and outer corner of the eye. I've plotted those points. The next step is to draw the eye opening. How does the eye opening and the eyelid lay across the iris? So on the top, it cuts off the top half of the iris a little bit, maybe only the top like 1/3 to 1/4, and below it, it doesn't even touch it. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at this example and my drawing, and I'm gonna go, oh, okay, the eyelid looks like it goes across here and slightly lower on the right side. Then down here, it is below it. So I've got that opening from here to here plotted out. Then you've got to look at your corner and go, and take your pencil and just lightly trace along that shape so you get a good feeling for what you've got to do. It doesn't just come to a point. It kind of goes up and over. So now I'm just going to gently sketch the shape of that. And then bring it down to the outer corner. And the same thing on the inside. It comes around and up, and then it turns. And you're drawing the inside edge, the edge of the eyelid that's actually touching the eyeball. So I'm gonna come across. Oh, I want a little higher there. And then come up. Right. Then I'm gonna draw that inside edge of the eye, the eyelid. It's got this little wet line called a water line where the eyelashes actually come off of on that bottom lid, and it disappears pretty quickly right there. Now take your eraser and get rid of the iris that's covered by the eyelid. Okay, the next thing, I'm gonna kind of give myself a good idea where this little tear duct is. Then I'm gonna look at the crease. Now the crease almost never is a mimic of this shape. So don't look at your eyelid and go, okay, I'm gonna come up here and do that. It's never, almost never the same shape. This one, if you look at it, her crease is closer to her eyelid here and further away here. It kind of comes up and then it flattens out and then it turns again. So pay a lot of attention to the character of that line. And like I did with the eye opening, come over here and take your pencil and just kind of give yourself, sketch it. So you kind of get a feeling for what it's gonna feel like to draw it. So it looks like it goes from here, up, then it starts to flatten out, and it goes out beyond there a little bit, and then it turns and goes that way. All right, then for the eyebrow, I kind of draw myself the middle of it. You're not gonna outline it because you don't wanna get rid of an outline. You just wanna give yourself an idea where the middle of it is so that when you draw an eyebrow, which is just little hairs, you have a good idea where to start those little hairs. So I'm just gonna go, there's the middle of the eyebrow. All right? From here on out now, it's pretty much just shading and looking at details. I start first with the eyeball. Your eyelid cast a shadow onto the eyeball. And remember, this is a sphere, and the sides of the sphere tuck back into your head. So look here at how much shading is going on there. That corner's pretty dark right there. This corner's pretty dark here. This little tear duct thing is kind of a squishy little sphere. And I'm going to kind of go around the areas I want to leave very white. I want to lighten up that dot. That dot's going to bother me. Okay, now I notice that this isn't dark enough now in that corner. And this isn't quite dark enough. So just a little bit of shadow there, shadow all the way, where the eyelid's casting a shadow onto the eyeball. And then start looking at how this gets darker as it sinks back into the eye socket. And the shadow kind of comes along the side of the iris too. It's a little bit darker there. Right. And it looks like the bottom eyelid is casting a shadow under the iris. Just a little bit. Okay, then you can start in one of two places. We can start with the iris or you can start with the crease. I'm gonna start with the iris because it's gonna take you the most time to do. This is where you wanna pay attention to every little change in color and value, because the texture of this iris is kind of like the rays of a sun. Like if the pupil is the center of the sun, all these lines are coming out from the center towards the edge in perfectly even intervals. And then some are darker and some are lighter. Everybody has their own personal pattern, just like your fingerprint. So I start off, there's definitely a darker bunch of lines coming out from the pupil, but don't be tempted to make them all the same length. See, it's shorter there and comes up. This whole thing, don't shade over your highlight. And then the whole thing has this uneven edge. So I'm gonna start here. They're real short, then they're kind of longer, coming out from the pupil. Short there, it's longer there, it gets really short. And then I'm gonna lightly mark where my highlight is so I don't do anything with it yet. So I've got some of these radiuses coming off of the pupil. Then I'm gonna go here at the outer edge and start adding these little ones before we ever get to the middle area. Now, don't be tempted to not look here and just keep making lines all the way around. 80% of my time, I am looking at the reference image, and only about 20% of the time at the paper. Usually just out of my peripheral vision. I'm keeping sure that my pencil's in the right spot, but I'm watching here at the details. It almost skips right there. There's hardly anything there. There's a few here, and then they get darker. You might need to take your pencil and just kind of clean up that outer edge a little bit and go against the grain here. You see, it's not solid. It's got darker and lighter. And now it's getting wider. Right up to the side of that highlight. I'm going to skip that highlight for a little while. Okay, then I'm gonna start looking at the pattern in between. I'm gonna add the darkest areas first. So there's this funny little like oval shape that's got points on the end of it. And there's a little one there. There's another little one here that's lighter than the other one. So take time and look at these details. Then there's more like little lines just kind of connecting the two, like filling in that area, because this is definitely not white. You know, that green is a shade of gray there. And as I'm doing that, that's when I notice, these lines aren't dark enough. And we're gonna blacken in that pupil a little bit later. If you do it too early, you end up smudging it. Of a medium color there, and then there's this darker line. There's a little bit thick spot on the end of it. A couple little darker ones like that. All right, so you get the idea. So after you spent quite a bit of time on that, then you're gonna look at the crease. The crease has to look like it goes down into your face. So you wanna start off kind of darkening this where the divot is, where the actual fold is. Then you're gonna work out of that crease onto the eyelid and out of that crease up onto the eyebrow bone. So when you're talking basic shapes, this eyelid right here, that's a cylinder. So your shading is gonna come out from the edge of your eyelid and then out from the crease, and they're gonna curve towards each other. Then look at your reference and look at how the skin kind of goes in lines. Like your skin lays across your muscles and across the contours of your body in a certain pattern, almost like a wood grain. Like how does your skin fold and curve around your body? So when I am shading, especially a human-like form, I mentally kind of almost feel like I'm sculpting their body into the paper. And see how I'm barely like brushing the pencil? And it's getting this real soft look. I never, ever, ever smudge. And the number one reason why I don't is if you deposit oils from your hand onto your paper, the oils hold the graphite, and you can probably not erase it completely ever. And when you spent all kinds of money on a really good piece of paper that is acid-free, and you put this oils from your skin on it, that skin oils will turn yellow over time, but the paper doesn't because it's really good paper. And you've got these smudges that look like, I don't know how they're described other than like pee stains on your paper, like somebody peed on your paper. So lots of time working dark to light. Okay, it's much, the shadow and the crease is much wider here and much narrower here. Okay, and then I've got to kind of work more up into the eyelid area. I'm going to sculpt along that crease line some more. I'm going to wrap the skin up around this. So this little fatty area right here is almost like another, it's like the end of a little ball, isn't it? So it's another sphere because it's got a highlight right here. So I'm going to bring my shading around that highlight. And then I'm going to kind of flatten it this way and keep going that way. Darken my crease a little more. Work down onto the eyelid. So if you'll notice, I'm jumping all over. So I build up my values a little bit at a time all over the eye so that my values kind of are consistent. So I don't shade like this value is that dark and then it gets that dark again over here. I want those to kind of match. So I want to build them up at the same time. Like this has got to get thicker and darker. I've got to wrap it around the eye. Because this is a cylinder, remember that little part of the eyelid is a cylinder. And then it kind of goes like this and starts to work its way down. And where the crease ends, that shading all starts to go into the eyebrow bone again. Okay, so work a lot of time on that. I'm going to keep moving so you don't get bored with me. I'm going to go out here. I'm going to add a little bit of shading under the eye. And notice that it folds. There's wrinkles and it kind of folds around the eye. I'm just laying in a little bit of value for now. I'll go back and adjust it. Then there's a part of the eye right here. And I always say it looks like a macaroni noodle. It like goes up and over and there's a highlight. So I gently kind of give myself an idea where that shape's gonna be. Then I've got to come out of the eye, up and over that spot, and then on from the face, up around that spot. Because this needs to be, that needs to be lighter than the rest of the skin. Can you see that there's a highlight there? So I want to bring more shading out from the edge of that eyelid so it curves over. More shading from the crease down into that. And more shading out from the eye. And then I'm going to just tighten that up a little bit. Okay, so take your time, get all that laying in there like you want it to. I'm going to darken that pupil. I'm going to grab a number 6 pencil because it's darker and softer. I'm going to darken that pupil. Don't do this until after you've finished all the texture of the iris. Oh man, I went right over my highlight. I'll have to go back in there and get that. Okay. And a lot of times when I put this in, I realize that some of these little lines need to come out of there and be a little darker. Okay. So imagine I finished all that shading and I want you to put eyelashes on. Eyelashes, you are going to need to get a scrap piece of paper and practice. We do not want SpongeBob eyelashes. We don't want eyelashes that go like this, right? We don't want straight eyelashes where the tops of them are squared off and they look like they're cut off. You want your eyelashes to flick and have nice little like points on the end. They're fat at the bottom and they flick and they get skinnier as they go up. Don't try and copy exactly what is there. Just remember there's a couple rules. Eyelashes change direction at about the middle of the eye. So when you're on the left side of the eye or the part of the eye that's closest to the nose, they flick towards the nose. I anchor my pencil at the edge of the eyelid and I flip it up. Now, the worst thing you can do is make them all match. A couple of them kind of go a different direction, a couple of them crisscross. If you make them all match, it looks like you made it up. So don't make it up. Look at what's going on here. Then they start to flick and come straight up. Some are longer than others, some double back. Then they start to try and change direction, and then they flick out to the outer corner of the eye. And some flick up more than others. Some kind of flick double back. Some lay flat. And then go back, and I darken the bases of them a little bit, make the bases just a little heavier, because it's pretty thick along there, much darker than it is. Resist the temptation to make them too long and look artificial. We want them to look real. Okay, darken the bases. You can widen the base a little. Okay, bottom eyelashes, they almost, depends on the person. Sometimes they always flick this way. Sometimes they flick straight and then they change directions. Hers, only a few of them are going this way. So I'm gonna put a few of them. And they start from the very outside edge. Do not put your eyelashes on the inside on that waterline. Don't be afraid to turn your body so that you can flick them correctly. Okay, then I notice I've got to come back in now and keep working on more shadows under here. I want this waterline to be darker. I want this shadow where the eyeball and that waterline meet to be darker. I'm gonna go back to my number 2 pencil so I don't get it too dark. Skin needs to be shaded under here more. All right, so we'll keep working on that. Remember, you will have finished your iris. Now you're gonna put eyebrows on. Eyebrows are no different than eyelashes. I think in my head like I am taking the pencil and I'm combing their eyelashes on with a pencil. So look at the direction that the eyebrow is going, and just start adding individual eyebrows. And just kind of comb them into place lightly. Just take your time, add a few at a time. I need to sharpen my pencil. Yeah, don't want too fat or goofy looking. And then when they get out here, on her and on a lot of people, they start going like this. If you look, some are going down, and then some are going up. There's some up here kind of going across. So I've got the general direction going, and now I've got to go back in here and fill in. And then, oh my goodness, it needs a lot more shading. The eyebrow now looks too dark because the skin isn't dark enough. Shade some of that skin under the eyebrow a little bit. A few little darker ones here and there. All right, I'm going to continue to do the details in here. I'm going to look a little bit more of the details in here and kind of add a few more of these wrinkles. So it's all about observation. It's all about taking your time. And it's all about looking for every detail that you can. All right, good luck.